And I'm especially happy to see the Canios has prevailed, even through our dark times. Canios has been the light of our lives, my favorite bookstore, and continues to do that, come rain or shine. And I'm very happy to be reading with Jill Bialosky, who I so admire. And to be reading a poem by Emily Dickinson, which I think the poem speaks of the intensity required of both writer and reader. It is about creativity, and it is so intense that it comes off the page. When you read it, it just comes off the page. Dare you see a soul at the white heat, then crouch within the door. Red is the fire's common tint, but when the vivid ore has vanquished flame's conditions, it quivers from the forge without a color, but the light of unanointed blaze. Least village boasts its blacksmith, whose anvil's even ring stands symbol for the finer forge that soundless tugs within, refining these impatient ores with hammers and with blaze, until the designated light repudiate the forge. So those are the hammers and the blaze of poetry that call upon the light that repudiates the forge. I love that poem. Yes, I would like to read from my book, The Marble Bed. And I'll be reading from the sequence, Alive and Well, Tomb Sculptures at the Staglieno Cemetery. I should say that after my reading and after Jill's reading, we're going to converse and talk about each other's work and ask questions about it, so that the readings will be short and the discussion will follow. Alive and Well, Tomb Sculptures in the Staglieno Cemetery in Genoa, Italy. And the first of this series is Angel. These pictures appear in the book. I took the photos myself, and they appear in the book, so I will read the poem that goes with them. Angel. So this is death, lifelike in marble and unconsoling on a merchant's tomb. No man with a scythe, no man at all, but her, slim-hipped in an airy gown, nipped at the waist. On the high breast, one hand rests, the slender fingers limp, waiting to beckon or direct. Come hither, lips, barbed wings. The eyes translucent, clear lakes you want to fathom, but the gaze says, I don't want to be known or understood. Angel of cold passion, angel of sex and death, essential answers hidden in one vamp. When I pass by, she turns to follow. Death, you terrify, just as you lure me with a knowing glance. Widow. I know her by the pleated satin dress, hair in a bun, the hesitation as she lifts the sheet, letting air in, astonished, peering into darkness, What will she find there at her husband's body, suddenly altered? Questions run through her. Dare she kiss the lips now growing colder? Can he hear her? Leaning awkwardly, loath to leave him, venturing a touch, she asks now, why him? In unending silence, she clings to precise details for an answer. Side glancing at the unmade bed, the high pile of cushions falling from their place. I know her by my husband's silver watch that hasn't stopped, the still warm belly, the pearl pajama button on the terrace. This next poem is Dreamer. In Italy, the statues in churches and in cemeteries are really quite sexy. Sex is okay in a religious sense, but this lady is holding poppies in her hand. That's not so good. So the authorities didn't like that too well. Dreamer. Clerics opposed her installation here, so close to rosaries, hands clasped in prayer. Officials said a travesty of holiness, pagan, impious. Other slurs unclear. What was it? Not the lips about to part, the mouth to speak, the tousled hair, the robe that slides down a bare shoulder, curvy hips. Those were the sculptor's art. Nor was it her calm perch, dreaming, not dead. The dream, though, those three ovals in her hand, seemingly blossoms, are poppy pods formed after flowering, from whose sticky substance opium is drawn. Demeter, in grief over her daughter's fate, would sip the stuff to soothe her loss. At the Staglieno, sexy is fine, is life. Addiction, no. Maria Francesca. Now here's a really sexy one. Maria Francesca, eyes shut, as an elation more than death, the legs straining to spring from their marble bed. A sheep slipped to reveal the nude young breasts, spool waist. Not the shattered body found in a car crash, fingers severed and flung. This likeness is perfect, shaped from a photograph. Notice the glow, the urge to speak, to laugh. Unlike some broken statues hinting at arms and phalluses, she gleams in all her parts. Alone, but not alone. Her man in marble bends to kiss her and clutch her thigh, not in lust, but in finality. I know the scene, your body fixed, but yearning to move again. I'm moving now in scattered pieces over miles and time, free neither to finish the task of life nor to abandon it. Struggle. If these stones were flesh, you'd hear their cries. Death, blank-faced and stiff. And a lithe woman who won't be taken by those tigery claws without a kick, a blow, a fierce objection. She bends, covered waist down and see-through too, actually marble carved to look ethereal, with the same mallet, calipers, and chisel the sculptor used to shape rock into muscle. Waist up exposed, but raging, unafraid. The work unfinished, dinners to order, dresses to try on, letters to write. When that last night you called for slacks and blazer from your sick bed, I watched the pull away, the savage, sun-driven, though futile fight. Woman in sunlight, carved in marble, white, now gone to grime, mottled, soot-blotched, smeared with blurred letters. A lithe woman reclines in a gauzy nightdress, curved from substantial hip to supple ankles. But for the cross she holds, I'd say in languor, stare at her, stare until you see lean hands open to grasp at air, feet kick to dance, silk hair unfold like a billowing scarf, and linger for the long intake of breath. I want to move inside the blackened stone and find a spark that flares up into blaze and flashes like sunbeams, to dazzle with tales of what it could be like to walk out of my weathered body, clean, alive. Well, I'll read one more poem and then give it over to Jill's luminous work. This is my pandemic poem. It's called Gone. Washington Square, 2020. From my window, I see the world without us in it. A vacant park, a silver maple sheltering no reader, a cherry tree dressed like a bride betrayed, her wedding canceled, a dogwood tree whose whites will fall without regretful eyes. No baby strollers, no candy wrappers stuffed in bins, just a sign, no bicycles, and memories of skateboard pirouettes. Around us death, the numbers spin the mind, fever dreams, the last breath held alone. I hadn't known death had undone so many. This park reminds us it was once a field for the unclaimed dead of galloping yellow fever. Construction workers dug up skeletons that had lain for years beneath our footsteps. Death in the hanging elm, a rooted gallows. Now the clear air, pollution-free, is poison for walkers, while trees stand stern, immune. Sad paradox. For comfort, I recall, Camille Pissarro would have lingered here. He painted Paris gardens from a window, having left his island's sprawling shores for tighter scenes. He gazed at people, matchsticks from above, in ones and twos. Below, the park's unlit paths are mute. But wait, just now a mournful, prayerful sax, unseen from somewhere, unlooses notes, calls me to the window, and I hear the sounds I can't imagine days without.
Thank you, Grace. That was beautiful, and it makes us reflect on, going forward, the art that will emerge from the experience that we're all having now in 2020 and in 2021. And the work from your book, so wonderful, so lovely, and the pairing with the photographs, I especially find that compelling. So thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
So as Grace indicated, after we hear from Jill, the two of them are going to be in a dialogue. But first, I'd like to introduce Jill to you. We're very pleased to have Jill with us. And of course, both of these poets are out east. They're on themselves right now during the pandemic. Jill's work, Asylum, is a very powerful, a very narrative opening up work. Previous to that, she's the author of several collections of poetry, including The Players, 3 novels, and most recently, The Prize, a New York Times bestselling memoir, History of a Suicide, about her sister's unfinished life, and Poetry Will Save Your Life, a memoir. Her poems are included in many collections and have appeared in The New Yorker, Harper's Magazine, and other publications. Jill is the executive editor and vice president at W.W. Norton and Company, who we love. We love Norton, does such wonderful work. And she's been a finalist for the James Laughlin Prize and others. I'd like to just read a quote about her new book by Lisa Russ Spare from LA Review of Books. Asylum's form, a hybrid, non-linear series of numbered, untitled lyric poems and fragments, gives Bialosky's lyrical instincts a more epic form, allowing her to play daringly and inquisitively with both time and place. By turns, symphonic, operatic, intimate, mythic, this quietly ambitious project is very much a book for the autumn of 2020. So let us please give a warm Zoom welcome now to Jill Bialosky.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much, Catherine. I too am very grateful to Catherine and Marianne and Canio's. Every time I drive on my way to Sag Harbor for groceries and pass the store, I feel as if I'm at home. There's just something so special about the store. And of course, its dedication to poetry and to the books that I personally want to buy. So thank you. And thank you, Grace, for accompanying me tonight. It's really just such a joy and such a joy to hear your beautiful work. I too wanted to begin with a nod to Emily Dickinson, and the poem that I chose of Emily Dickinson's to read is one of my favorites. After great pain, a formal feeling comes. And it's also a nod to Grace's final poem in her book. It's a 10-part poem sequence called The Letting Go. So after great pain, a formal feeling comes. The nerves sit ceremonious like tombs. The stiff heart questions, was it he that bore, and yesterday or centuries before? The feet mechanical go round, a wooden way of ground or air or aught, regardless grown, a quartz contentment like a stone. This is the hour of lead, remembered if outlived, as freezing persons recollect the snow. First chill, then stupor, then the letting go. And I'm going to, my book, Asylum, is a book-length sequence in 103 lyric sections. And and it is it's sort of, I guess that it is, I wanted to just say that it's meant to be read almost as if you would read a novel from beginning to end. And its primary subjects have to do with the relationship I think, between the lyric poem and the cultural engagement, trauma, environmental degradation of both nature and the urban world. And it also circles the personal and collective peril that we are living in. And so I'm going to read a sequence that I put together that was published in Granta. And so it's a sequence of 14 of the numbered sections that move throughout the book-length poem. And I call this sequence Thrive, a lyric sequence. Together we circled the rings. A boy, he was still learning, and we moved slowly, picking up rhythm as we traveled. We would see it all, digging our blades to find traction, balance, to free the mind of doubt. Falling, occasionally bumping up against the outer edge. It would take years if we were lucky, stumbling in the face of reason. O muses, O geniuses of art, O memory, our blades crushing the ice. I knew by then that anything was possible. Once we witnessed a child's cheek nearly cut out from another skater's blade during a fall as he swerved in and out of the skaters, the triple axle of envy, gluttony, and pride igniting their hearts. Always someone who wanted to outdo another. We had to witness all of it because it had already happened. I had to be vigilant, cautious. Sometimes I held his hand tight because I knew. We kept our heads down. We were entranced, focused. Sometimes we could not see anything before us. That's what it required. One year I had forgotten the first leaves of spring. I had forgotten all the years of toil. I looked up and the trees had flowered. All it took was waiting out the bleak winter, the hemisphere of darkness. The color was lime green. I wanted to tell her, this is what it's like. Like just awakening, drenched, they persist. Ghosts in our poems, ghosts in our imagination, ghosts in our waking hours, ghosts who elude philosophers, poets, scientists, psychiatrists, therapists, and doctors, ghosts who perpetuate, who guileless will not keep quiet, who preside over the populace and unknowingly rob the living, ghosts who made their own house be their gallows, Dante says, will never rest. Under microscope magnifying glass, using magnets and electricity, pin and tuning fork, lumbar punctured, photographed, sketched, hypnotized, documented, compared, analyzed, tortured, starved, etherealized, objectified, and concretized, held prisoner by the perpetuators of a science, by the history of an era, by the myth of the unsolvable math of the mercurial mind. Daffodils, survivors of the cruelest month, tossing their heads in sprightly dance, from the ground arise. Beautiful long spines and yellow crowns, tulips, plas flower, hues fancied a fox, too excitable, too red. What we thought would thrive, we found a family of fragile evergreens we had planted one year. Bottom needles eaten out by starving deer. One we had to tie to a stake to keep steady and alive. Like the snap of a branch, like the terror of the wind, like roots dug up, like worms in the undergrowth, like the rat on the pavement smashed by the wheels of a car into an inconceivable pancake, like the inexplicable act of making a noose, hanging it from the ceiling and tightening it around the neck, like the argument in a forest, like a person who knows things, a person who can't forget, a person who probes, persists, and is unkind, like the mind hating itself, like the wind giving in to logic, like thought murdering the body, like the night when the resilience of lavender, woody, spiky, tucked in the corner where deck meets earth, gave up and failed to thrive. Because it was Christmas and I was home with my fiance, because her blue eyes burned with the brightness of knowing and barely a fleck of gloom, because she was young and brave and still wore cheap and sexy dresses in which only she made elegant. And though she sometimes came home intoxicated and vomited from drink and wept alone, suffering from the human syndrome of need, want, and abandon, she still slept in a Bugs Bunny sweatshirt, made us all scrambled eggs, nursed her beloved cat, gossiped with girlfriends on her phone, and slept stone cold into the morning like Sleeping Beauty, awaiting a kiss in a room under a vaulted ceiling of a synagogue of the holy and depraved, where I too once slept in the cradle of despair and rage. Because gods are threatening to tear down branches, uproot trees, because there is no reprimand, recourse, no release, rain unleashes in downpours, wind casting for answers for crimes committed, souls humiliated, denied passage, denied rest. There is no end to the flooding, no end of grief. In downpours, rain is unleashed. Metamorphosized into trees that for eternity bleed, if cut or pruned or preyed upon, forever cast into hell's seventh circle, the lip above the chasm of pain, which holds the din of infinite grief, unable to settle neither in heaven nor the underworld, the self-slaughtered. Hinduism considered it soul murder, Muslims hellfire, and in the eternal life forever to inflict themselves with pain. Aristotle considered self-murder a crime against oneself and country. Jews denied a proper burial, and for your lifeblood, I will require a reckoning. There is no logic to divine, no pleasure or pain greater than human stain. A drawer of junk jewelry, combs and brushes, sweatshirts made of honor dress, wrapped in cellophane and stored like shadows in the closet's hinterland, diary with crushed pressed flowers, drawn red hearts, confessions, hopes, dreams, ink bleeding on onion skin, thin as leaves, novels with pages flagged, postcard of Mexico I once sent, lock of hair sealed under glass, of the rashness impassioned, forsaken, forever bemused, a life mask made of strips of paper mache, as if to mock the dead's eternal masquerade. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Extraordinary, extraordinary.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you so much. And
Very powerful.
I should have said ahead of time that you may have noticed some lines from Dante's Inferno in certain passages, and also a nod to a line by Wordsworth and also Plath. I should have done this, but in any case.
I think we got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Grace.
You're in good poetry company here, not to worry.
Okay, good.
Extraordinary, extraordinary work.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm really, really thrilled to talk about Grace's work and some of what you read tonight, Grace. So may I start with a question for you?
Of course.
Okay. So I was very curious about the statues in the sequence that you read. And I did not know, I hadn't really read the, that you had taken the photographs yourself, Grace. I wondered about your decision to include the photographs. And I wondered too, what came first? Did the statues themselves inspire the poems, or were they remembered in recollection? They come so alive in the poems that you actually don't really need to see them, and yet they do add a really beautiful kind of aesthetic pleasure and palette. But I was very curious about these poems and these particular statues.
Well, let me take the second question first.
Okay.
I stumbled on the statues. I stumbled on the Staglino Cemetery when I was walking in Genoa, and it was a lucky stumble. And I didn't realize at first what those statues meant to me. But the images burned in my mind, the way images sometimes do, you know, when you're looking at a flower or a tree and you don't know why it means so much to you. And the poem you write will tell you why. So those statues remained in my mind as image. I think of the 17th century poets who wrote compositions of place by focusing on a very homely image and working through to the understanding. Well, that's what the images meant to me, and why include them? I just couldn't detach myself from them, I guess. And probably the poems, I hope the poems would work without, but I felt really attached to the photos, and my wonderful publisher at Turtle Point Press, Ruth Greenstein, agreed and included them with the poems.
Yes, no, they're really lovely. There was you wrote to me that you saw your book as a book coming alive after grief and finding life and sexual motivation in the statues.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, I think there were these wonderful lines that stood out to me, and I think it was the first poem of the series: angel of cold passion, angel of sex and death, essential answers hidden in one vamp. And that word vamp is so interesting and has so many connotations. And I wondered how you came upon that line.
Yes, from vampire means seductress. And cold passion, I guess I was thinking of Yeats when I wrote that. I was thinking of Leda and the Swan, the cold passion of Zeus. I was trying to keep the language hard and tough and not lapse into sentimentality, which I feel can be the opposite of feeling sometimes. And that's what I found in the statues. I found life in this cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
I found life and sexual passion. When you go into a church in America or England, you see angels or statues that are covered up. Not so in Italy.
Hmm.
In Italy, they're nude or they're covered lightly with the stone imitation of muslin or of chiffon,
Hmm.
and they're very alluring and very seductive. And I felt that the seduction was a lure into death too, which was frightening, but it was primarily a statement of life.
Mhm.
This is what I felt. And coming out of grief into life was a wonderful renewing, reawakening for me.
Yes, yes. I love that metaphor of the statues as being cold and inanimate, and yet you infuse them with life and with sexuality and passion. So just that in itself, I found very intriguing.
Thank you.
Um, and there was a stanza also in the sequence. This one is from Maria Francesca. And you write, I'm moving now in scattered pieces over miles in time, free neither to finish the task of life nor to abandon it. The word neither is so interesting to me in those lines. I hear irony in it, and yet I kept reading it over and wondered, are we meant to see it as a commitment to life or both? So I wondered how you landed on that, and whether that was a discovery, that whether those lines came out of the discovery in the process of writing the poem.
Yes, they always do. They
Yeah.
come out of, surprise me,
Yeah.
coming out of the poem. But when I think of those lines, I think of my late husband, who was a scientist, physician, devoted to life, wanting to live, even in his last hours, wanting desperately to live, whatever condition, physical condition he was in. And yet, before the presence of death, he felt utterly helpless. And I personally feel helplessness in those lines.
Mm-hmm.
Can't do either one. Can't finish life, can't abandon it, but also the commitment to it.
Yes, to me, those lines are very powerful and made me think deeply about the task of life, um, and how we live. Um, the book itself faces mortality and death and looks upon a marriage. Um, those are sort of the facts of the book. But I'm interested in your process, Grace, in how these poems were made. Did they surprise you, frighten you? Did you find solace as you wrote them?
All of those
All
things,
of
all
those.
of the above, all of the above, yes. I didn't want to lose grief. Lose grief, you lose the whole of love, you lose it all. I wanted to look at it. I wanted to delve beyond the ordinary expected emotions, to find out what it was all about. And they surprised me, they frightened me, and it was salvation.
Mm-hmm.
It was a dedication to art, which uh, is a displacement of religion in so many ways. I feel that the so-called religious artists were really more devoted to their art bent to theology. And well, that's an aside, but I felt the dedication to something larger than myself.
Mm-hmm. That definitely comes through. So I just have two other questions for you, Grace. One is, I read in a review that your book, and I think you answered this question just now, but I'll say it anyways. I read in a review that your book is an argument with Dante, that it struggles with the injured world rather than Dante's rigid hierarchies. Do you see it as such? And I think you just really already answered that question.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So yeah.
Yes.
He put people in the wrong circles.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he just ran rampant over theology. For him, he was dedicated to the form, to, in his case, meter and rhyme, to the language, to the rules of language more than the rules of religion.
Right.
And yes, I do think so.
Well,
shouldn't we get to your book now? My turn.
Sure, I did have one more question, but that's fine. It really is about that wonderful poem, Because. So I wanted you to read it, but maybe we don't have time. I don't know where we are with time.
You asked a question about it. Perhaps I'll just read the last line.
Sure.
You asked me informally whether it was an interrogation of grief, of mortality, and yet it bursts with life, with joy, with reconciliation. And let me just read the last line, I think, as an answer to that. Because I cannot lose the injured world, without losing the world, I'll have to praise it.
And I love that. I think that it reminded me too of the Adam. I'm sorry, but I always mispronounce this poet's name,
Zagajewski. I mispronounce it all the time.
Yeah. That ending reminded me of his poem, Praise the Mutilated World. Also, well, I invite all of you here to of course buy Grace's book, but to relish that lovely poem.
My turn. Jill, the passages you read are highlights of this powerful book, Asylum, and I heard it even with more power during your reading. The lines, no end of grief and infinite grief, from those passages rang in my mind. I'm talking about process. I'm asking about process. Did you find salvation from grief in the act of writing? Did writing save you, comfort you, help you through this terrible time? Or did it heighten the pain, or both?
Mm-hmm. You know, I always find salvation in writing. So I feel that, well, in some ways, it's the only way to make sense of certain aspects of living that we can't, that the only way that we can articulate it is somehow through poetry. I think that's, so I felt more salvation, and also some anger, in tackling some of the subjects in Asylum, because, you know, when I began working on the book, it was probably in like 2016. And, you know, as I was working on this and thinking about it as a long poem, the cruelties just kept mounting. And I kept thinking about humanity and human despair, and how people can survive so much terror and well, what we've all witnessed collectively. And so in some ways, these different aspects just kept evolving into the work. And I kept thinking, yes, the personal of a sister taking her life, but also the collective of the struggle that individuals face in both personal and communal and social realities, that just kept staying with me. This idea of community and responsibility.
Your work shimmers with originality, and yet you've done an immense amount of reading. Your book recounts a harrowing yet life-giving journey with references to Dante's journey through hell, Celan's death-bringing speech, Eliot's wasteland, and they shine in your lines. Did those writers guide you on your journey?
Yes, in some ways they did, Grace. I had the opportunity, the great pleasure early on in my career as an editor to publish the translations of Paul Celan, his selected poetry and prose, and the John Felstiner translation. And when I was working on Asylum, I was also thinking about the horrors of anti-Semitism that had been released in just such horrifying ways during the last 4 years. And, being Jewish myself and my family and my community, I really felt that chill of history repeating itself, and the fear of that. And Celan, as you know, Romanian poet who lived in Germany, wrote his poetry in German, but experienced the ramifications of the Holocaust, and also threw himself into the Seine. And those lines, the black milk of death, just kept repeating themselves in my mind when I would hear about these Jewish cemeteries, the headstones toppled, or the killing in Pittsburgh within a synagogue. And I just kept thinking, so it's one of the strands. And as for Dante, that kind of took me by surprise, because in part of the poem, I see the poet as a guide, taking a child, a boy, on this journey, with the hope. The poet has the foreknowledge of disaster, trauma. The child doesn't. And so that's a tension throughout. And although I agree, years ago I wrote a poem, I skate. When I was a child, I grew up in Cleveland, and ice skating was the thing you did in the winter. And then when my son was small, I used to take him ice skating to in Central Park, and the circles always reminded me of Dante, and the rings, and just going by. And I even I have a poem about that in one of my books. So that's where Dante kind of entered my mind again. And so I just kind of followed that in and out of the book. But yeah, those ice skating rinks can be treacherous in Central Park.
Yeah. Putting the sinners in.
Right,
the
right.
sinners.
And the gluttony, and people always want, then there would be the wonderful skaters, the figure skaters in the middle doing their triple axels while the rest of us struggle to get around the rink. So there was a lot of playfulness for me in that idea.
Dantesque playfulness.
Right, right. But I agree with you and your view of Dante.
Yes, I feel that way about many paintings too. Robert Campin painting the Annunciation. He just wanted to get it right, to get the candle painted with a flame, which nobody had done before, rather than the theology. That's my feeling about great religious art. You wrote a heart-wrenching memoir, History of a Suicide, My Sister's Unfinished Life. What were the differences between writing this in prose and Asylum in poetry? Differences in language, differences in urgency, in writing habits?
Yes. That memoir was published, I think maybe, I don't know, many years ago now, 10 years maybe. And I really thought that I had finished with that subject. And when I wrote that memoir, it was really just, there was something very raw and urgent about it for me. It was an investigation in some ways. And I was surprised that it came back again as I was working on Asylum. I really didn't expect that to happen, but I think it's a lifelong inquiry. And as a devoted witness, maybe I feel a sense of responsibility in some ways, because the more we can bring these difficult subjects into art, the more they can become palatable, at least. One hopes for that. But it did surprise me, and I did feel different. I do feel in the poetry there's more of a sense of anger about and failure to understand, and other aspects that I couldn't have recognized until this time in my life.
This links to another question I had. You see the natural world in luminous clarity. After having forgotten the first leaves of spring, after not seeing anything before us, suddenly looking up and finding that trees had flowered. And following that as the discovery, all it took was waiting out the bleak winter. And after darkness, the color was lime green. You see things in precise detail, the daffodil, the fallen bird. Is this clarity heightened by the intensity of grief? Or is it learned technique, or do the two collide at some point?
I think that first of all, a lot of the natural imagery in the poem comes from living out here, and we have a piece of property that on one side is a reserve where there's this forest of trees, And I've had the house for over 20 years, and I have watched from my deck, the transformation of nature and trees, and how, some trees get snuffed out by the sun, and all of these, ideas of connection started coming into focus for me, the way in which nature, the survival in nature is so similar to survival of humanity, of humans and animals. And so I really I really connect with that. And as a poet, I always, I came of age during the time when the deep image poem was coming into view, with like James Wright and other poets.
Robert Bly.
Right. So I've always had that that gift of knowing what a metaphor can do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which, I don't know that, well, this is another, somebody had some argument on Twitter about metaphor, and it was as if poets had never heard of it, younger poets. So I feel very lucky to have begun to, seriously write and learn my craft from my elders in that movement.
Yes. I just have a couple more questions.
Yeah, we maybe should. Do we have time, or do you think other people want to? Well, whatever Marianne and Catherine think.
Well, another question, or
Okay,
two is fine. There's a question in the chat that we don't want to get to, maybe, and then we can wrap it up.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Could I just ask about the title, Asylum? It's got a marvelous, rich ambiguity. The mind's haven from distress and horror, and also a prison, and further a place to hide from horror. Did you intend the ambiguity? How did you happen on the word asylum?
You really have understood, Grace, those different meanings I really wanted in the poem, the asylum that we seek for our own sense of centering and calmness, the sanctuary of solitude. I also thought about the, asylum of trees living, all together. And then, of course, the political connotations, and also, the mental connotations of asylum, which, I think probably the first that comes to mind is, the institutions, the mental institutions, and my poem, just questions the mind and the unsolvable, the ways in which we think we have answers that really don't finally exist. So I wanted to somehow make the word almost disappear from the institution of it in some strange way.
It just gets richer and richer as you talk about it.
As a place of, the sense of needing asylum and community too at the same time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for those really probing questions.
Thank you for those answers. Now let's see what's in the chat.
Yeah, listen, thank you both for that discussion. It opens up the work in a way that allows us to know more about what was on your mind and beyond what was on the page. So we have a question from Mary Gilliland, if she's still with us. If you want to just unmute yourself and ask that, that would be great.
There she is. It's a wonderful question.
I'll need to read it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, wonderful to hear this illuminating strong poetry from Grace and Jill. Grace, thinking of your words, her calm perch dreaming, and to walk out of my weathered body, would you call liminality your angel while you were composing this book?
Mary, I love the sound of your question, but I don't understand the word liminality. What?
Oh, it's just liminality. It's threshold. You know, it's so between life and death, the way dream is between consciousness and a single consciousness and a greater consciousness. So
I see.
yeah.
Well, I like your saying it, but it wasn't on my mind. I don't mind your saying it at all. But I wasn't thinking that. No, dreaming, I was thinking about her opium, her poppies. The poppies in her hand, and walk out of my weathered body was in my mind an identification with that relaxed, beautiful statue. These marble statues were intricately cut and carved and designed to suggest moods and emotions that I never dreamed could be done in marble. So much so that I just identified with that dead woman and wanted to walk out of her body, meaning my body, in identification. But I like liminality. I'm going to.
Well, this is what you're doing actually with that process, with that phenomena. So,
well, thank you.
It's a word. Okay.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you both. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you both. Your work is really terrific, and you know, thinking about the Italian sculptors, you know, makes us realize how bereft we are of that great art here stateside. So, thanks for bringing that into the Zoom. I'd like to encourage everyone to support these two wonderful poets. We have their books at the store. You can get them on bookshop.org. It's really difficult throughout this entire year for artists and writers in particular, when they bring out a book, to, you know, be able to have their book find an audience, because there aren't the openings and the readings that they're able to give as much as we could beforehand. So think about giving it as a gift as well as for yourself. And I guess what we can all do right now is maybe unmute ourselves and give a nice rousing applause for the two poets this evening, Grace Schulman and Jill Bialosky. Thank you both.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Marianne and Catherine and Grace and everyone. Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah. Light the light. Keep the lights burning. We're so grateful to you both, Grace and Jill. You've started the season of light right here with us tonight, and we're so grateful. So thank you, and thanks to our wonderful audience. We'll be happy to take your book orders, and we wish you all well. Happy Hanukkah, and good evening.
And I'd just like to welcome everyone back to some future events. We have on December 30th at 1 p.m. Craig Carlson from Paris. He has a restaurant there, Breakfast in America. So he has a new book out called Let Them Eat Pancakes. So that should be great fun. And coming up in January, we will have a book discussion as part of Racial Justice East End, a collaborative group that we're a part of. We'll be discussing Carol Anderson's book, White Rage, in two different dates, the 14th and the 28th of January. So those are two upcoming things that you can join us with. But everyone be safe, light the lights, be the light, and have joyous and good holidays. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you. Good to see you.
We'll be in touch.
Kisses,
See you soon.
personal kisses. And
Thank you. Tanti baci. Ciao.